Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to today's CEOS Cultural Economics seminar online, which is part of the Association for Cultural Economics International. I'm Elisabetta Lazzaro, the CEOS Coordinator, Professor of Creative and Cultural Industries Management at the Business School for the Creative Industries, University for the Creative Arts in the UK. Today's seminar is on voting and song contests, economics, law, history, and practice. Song contests, in particular the Eurovision Song Contest, have attracted a good deal of research in various disciplines, besides affecting the careers of singers, musicians, and artists. So today we will look at the major findings and methodological challenges that research provides, and how does it contribute to academia, pedagogy, and practice, and possibly what are the more general lessons we can learn for other sectors. I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers of today, Dr. Dean Vuletic and Professor Juan Moreno-Ternero. Dean is an historian of contemporary Europe, and he's the author of the first ever scholarly book on the history of Eurovision, and is also co-editor with Adam Dubin and Antonio Obregon of the volume Eurovision Song Contest as a Cultural Phenomenon, published this year by Routledge. He's also the lecturer behind the world's first university course on Eurovision, which he began teaching at the New York University and has since taught at the University of Vienna and Charles University in Prague. And he's dubbed as Professor of Song Contest. He's also a prominent commentator of Eurovision in the international media. Juan is a professor at the Department of Economics, University Pablo de Olavide in Seville, Spain. He's a honorary member of the Spanish Economic Association and holds a Ph.D. in economics from the University of Alicante. His research interests include the distributive justice, welfare economics, health economics, and political economy, in which he widely published. He currently serves as co-editor of Mathematical Social Sciences, as well as associate editor of Economic Theory, Social Choice and Welfare, and Economic Theory Bulletin. He recently published with Victor Ginsburgh the paper, the Eurovision Song Contest, Voting Rules, Biases and Rationality, in the Journal of Cultural Economics this year. And we would like also to give a special greetings to Victor Ginsburgh. We don't know to say who is Victor Ginsburgh. He's a superstar, among others, in cultural economics, former president of the Association for Cultural Economics International, wonderful pedagogue. He has been also my Ph.D. supervisor, and a wonderful person, with spirit. So hello, Victor. So, Dina, would you like to start? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta, for that lovely introduction. And it really is a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today to talk about Eurovision from the perspective of cultural economics, and especially to be here with Juan. And also to discuss the article which he co-wrote with Victor. I have to say that Victor's work was very important for my own, for this book, because he was one of the first to research the significance of voting in Eurovision. So I'm very grateful to him for his pioneering work. So this is my book, Post-War Europe and the Eurovision Song Contest. And as Elisabetta pointed out, it's the first academic study of the history of Eurovision, and it was financed by a Marie Skłodowska-Curie grant from the European Commission. The reason why I wanted to write this was I simply wanted to prove things in the history of Eurovision. I wanted to get away from the sensationalist showbiz history that had been written of the contest and to end myths. One of the biggest myths I wanted to end was that Eurovision was conceived in the context of European integration and as a project of European integration. It wasn't, I found. It was actually meant as a experiment in technology to test the nascent technology of TV, which was developing across Europe in the 1950s. So how I went about researching this book was that I visited several archives, the most important being those of the EBU. I looked at the internal discussions that were going on regarding the organization of Eurovision, the choices that were made for the contest format, including regarding the voting. I also looked at the archives of international organizations that have been interested in Eurovision, such as the Council of Europe and the European Union. I analyzed all of the shows, every single one, 16 for this book, and the 1,500 entries that had been performed in the contest during that period. And I suppose when you're a historian as well, what matters is to write a compelling narrative. And it's important to write in a way that you pay attention to literary aesthetics. So I would always point this out as well when speaking to people from other fields. As historians, we also need to know how to write well and engagingly. So if you do read my book, think about this as well when you think of how I did my methodology and the research results together.
I'm sorry, Dean, could you please make a full screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And the second book that I've produced on Eurovision was co-edited with Antonio Obregon and Adam Dubin. It's called the Eurovision Song Contest as a Cultural Phenomenon, and it looks at the various fields that the study of Eurovision can contribute to: history, law, politics, media, cultural and music studies. We have it all in there, as well as statistics. There's an article by Jose Luis Arroyo Baruguete, Lourdes Fernandez, and Antonio Obregon on the effect of order, the presentation of the songs in Eurovision, in which they conclude that this order impacts the public more than it does the jury. So let's look a bit at the history of Eurovision voting. In my first book, I call it Eurovision's Biggest Election, as more citizens from more European countries can vote in Eurovision than in any other election. This year, there were 38 European states represented, plus Israel and Australia. Now, until the late 1990s, voting was done by national juries, phoning in their results. This was also a way of testing new technology in the late 1950s by getting the juries to phone in their results. These juries always represented the participating countries, and they were composed of music and television experts or members of the general public. They ranged from 2 to 20 members. There were several different scoring systems used until 1974. From 1975, the EBU finally settled on the 12, 10, 8-1 system that we had today. The reasons why 12, 10, and 8 were chosen as the highest scores was to make sure that there wouldn't be a tie. There had been a 4-way tie in 1969. It proved to be hugely controversial for the contest, even led to boycotts and brought the existence of the contest into question. So this is why it is important Eurovision doesn't have a tie. How is the voting presented and how are the voting results presented? They're presented in terms of the names of countries, even though Eurovision entries are organized by national broadcasting organizations, public service broadcasting organizations, not by national governments. In European democracies, these national broadcasting organizations are meant to be independent of national governments. It wasn't always like this. In the late 1950s, the EBU tried to fit the names of song titles on the scoreboard, but then it realized that this actually didn't make for as an exciting of a television show. It was better to have the names of states, playing with patriotic sentiments and names that were familiar to an international audience, made for a much exciting television show than having the names of the television stations or the songs on the scoreboard. So this is why Eurovision entries are presented under the names of states. Another myth that I also wanted to address in my book was that voting blocks in Eurovision are something only recent and especially brought in by East European countries. This is not true. I demonstrate from the very early years of the contest, there was a Francophone voting bloc, which Nordic countries protested against and then developed their own Nordic voting bloc. And here you see the Spanish group Baccarat singing Parlez-vous français in 1978. French was the most successful language in Eurovision during the Cold War, but from the 70s, we start seeing a decline in the power of the French language internationally, and certainly also in Eurovision. And we see especially the rise of the Anglophone entries and even an Anglophone voting bloc, as well as a more and more powerful Nordic voting bloc. So much for the East Europeans being the only ones to bring voting blocs to Eurovision. Toto Cutugno, he sang Insieme together in 1992, in Zagreb in 1990, the first Eurovision after the Cold War. A Eurovision that had a lot of songs about Europe. And the Zagreb contest was the first to be staged in Eastern Europe. Yugoslavia, as a non-aligned country, although Communist Party led, had been performing in Eurovision since 1961. Other countries of Eastern Europe were not allowed to do so because they were not members of the EBU. They did begin to enter the EBU from 1993, and Eurovision consequently as well, because to be in Eurovision, you have to be a member of the EBU. And after their entry, East European voting blocs became apparent in the contest, and they caused a lot of consternation among some of the older members of Eurovision, especially Germany, France, Spain, and the United Kingdom, which weren't doing so well in Eurovision after the 1990s. Now, there was a change in the voting system from 1999. 100% public voting was allowed. This had to do with the growing commercialization of the contest in the 1990s, as well as the fact that the new technology of SMS voting allowed viewers to engage more with the actual contest. Now, another myth I really want to emphasize here is that East Europeans have been accused of unfair neighborly voting in voting blocs, but this is not true as well. There is no one East European voting bloc. There never has been. There are regional blocs in the Balkans, between Romania and Moldova in the former Soviet Union, as there are in parts of Western Europe, and these never decided the winner. I think that we can rather attribute the success of East European countries in Eurovision from 2002 to 2009 to the fact that they put in much more effort into their Eurovision entries, because this for them was an important tool of cultural diplomacy. Now, sometimes the commentaries in Western European media regarding East European entries and bloc voting have been, I would say, rather cruel, and have resorted to stereotypes of Eastern Europe that have long historical tradition in the West. 2004, Poland comes in with this entry, We Are Slavs. The music video is especially interesting, I think, in the way that it addresses these stereotypes of Eastern Europe. So perhaps that's something you can take a look at after we finish speaking today. Now, I should also emphasize that it's not all about East-West divisions in Europe, in the participation, in the voting. What I think is actually most definitive in Eurovision, or has been in the last 1.5 decades, is the North-South division. Increasingly, we've seen countries not being able to participate in Eurovision, especially since the economic crisis in 2008, because it simply cost their television stations too much to do so. These tend to be countries of the South, And whereas in Northern Europe, for example, in Sweden, you see this interval act at the 2016 Eurovision in Stockholm. Sweden puts on a huge national selection, Melodifestivalen, every year, which costs a lot of money. It also invests a lot of resources into its Eurovision entries, as do other countries such as Norway, Germany these days as well. So they're able to afford much more when it comes to Eurovision than a lot of Southern European countries are. Next year, we'll see Bulgaria, North Macedonia and Montenegro not participating in Eurovision because of the financial pressures that they're facing. Another Southern European country that's been out of Eurovision since 2012, and because of its protests against the Eurovision voting system, is Turkey, which has withdrawn since 2012 because it says that the voting system of 50% expert jury, 50% public jury that was introduced in 2009 to somehow address the East European bloc voting, that is unfair for Turkey. Turkey has a huge diaspora across Western Europe, and that it doesn't want to participate in Eurovision under the current rules. But I would always also say that Turkey's withdrawal from Eurovision is a sign of its distancing from the mainstream of European politics, especially as its negotiations with the European Union for membership of that organization have been stalled. Now, this year, there is a new novelty in voting that has just been declared, a global vote that will be introduced next year. So people around the world will be able to vote in Eurovision, and the collective global vote will be the equivalent of the vote of a participating country. This, I think, is a further sign of the commercialization of the contest, the extension of the global brand. Global licenses for Eurovision have been sold to Asia, the United States, Latin America, and Canada. And for me, this is just another way to further profit from the Eurovision brand and to expand it globally. So in conclusion, in one sentence, for me, Eurovision voting has historically been about expansion, be it commercial or technical, politics, and experimentation with new technologies. And that's my website. If you'd like to contact me with any other questions after today's talk, feel free to do so.
Thank you very much, Dean. And now the floor is for Juan.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Elisabetta, for the nice invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and also speaking after Dean, whose presentation I truly enjoyed. As Elisabetta said at the beginning, this is what I'm going to present is mostly based on a joint paper with Victor Ginsburgh, with whom I had the privilege to cross paths some years ago, and I've been working with him in several eclectic projects, and he's mostly responsible for me, approaching this field of cultural economics, which was completely unknown to me. So this is a caveat to essentially say that I'm an external to this field, and please, be indulgent with some of my comments here, and I'll be more than happy to learn from you afterwards in the discussion. Let me actually free write on some of the things that Dean said in his presentation. Essentially here, the main motivation for this work was concentrating on these voting aspects, voting methods, to be more precise, of this Eurovision Song Contest, which is a matter of debate because it has actually, the voting rules has changed 18 times between 1956 and 2018, and now being announced a new change for the upcoming edition. So it's going to keep on going because this is a complex issue, as many of us know very well from the field of social choice within economics. Now, what we presented in this paper is mostly focusing on the case of the 65th contest in Rotterdam in 2021. And let me point out that in general, I'm going to simplify most of the details here for this short presentation. You have these two types of juries, so to speak, the experts and the televoters. completely different. That's part of our analysis here to actually explore the differences between these two bodies. There's a lot of sizable literature dealing with these two sort of groups and how they are able to judge quality. I'm not going to get into that, but let me simply say, for instance, that if you go to the rules of the European Song Contest, you see that in the case of expert voting, each national jury is composed by 5 members, and there's supposed to be some sort of combined rank, as I italize here, from these 5 members to the group as a whole. And this is a far from trivial issue in the literature on social choice, and we feel there's a lot of things to be discussed in that process that remains somewhat obscure in the rules. As for televoting, is a whole different concept, and mixing both on equal footing is also an issue to debate. Now, what Victor and I want to mostly suggest in this paper is that this is a very difficult task for jurists in general, and in particular for experts, to rank all the 26 songs that they listen to in the, let me focus on the final edition. I know there are semifinals and most of the things that I'm going to say apply there. But even in the final show, when you have this 26 song, it's a lot of pressure and not that much time to come up with a specific ranking for all these songs, right? In order to provide the scoring. There's a lot of literature documenting these trade-offs and speed accuracy and how people regret after making their choices too fast. And so it seems that simplifying this process is a worthy enterprise. And what we recommend is to endorse what we refer as Shapley voting in honor of Joey Shapley, Nobel Prize winner in economics, and his famous contribution in the literature on cooperative game theory. Now, I'm not going to get into the details here, but let me simply roughly describe how this method works. The idea here is very simple. The idea is to give each jury 1 vote, and this jury will be able to fully allocate this vote among all the candidates, songs if you want, that this jury might find good enough, right? So it's a matter of approving songs rather than just ranking them. You can freely choose the number of songs that you select, and at the end of the day, you will give an equal weight to each of the ones that you consider, right? Finally, once you do this, you aggregate across all members, and that produces a well-defined ranking. But this is a method. I'm not going to get into the details, but it has good properties, and it can actually be characterized by some of them. And this is a theoretical result that I will skip for this presentation. Instead of doing that, let me illustrate how this works, right? So for instance, in this table here, you have several judges and 10 songs. So imagine that, for instance, the first judge likes songs 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7. So then each of these songs is going to get 1/5 of this vote that Judge A has, and the others will get 0. You repeat this with all the judges, and then you aggregate. That's the idea. And it's interesting to notice that in principle, different judges are allowed to select a different number of songs. They don't have to select the same number. Okay, this is theoretically how this method works. Now, we wanted to illustrate how this works for the case of the Eurovision Song Contest, but of course we have a problem there because we don't know how many songs each jury would like to select. So the only thing we can do is to assume that they select the same number of songs. Suppose, for instance, that each of them selects 3 songs. And then what we do is to go to the data and truncate the voting at each of the juries to this number of songs. And then we simulate these results and find what could happen. So there's a table here in which I'm not going to spend too much time, but this is essentially implementing each of these possibilities. For instance, in the second column, we have the real scores that these songs had. I'm concentrating here on the case of experts. We can do the same for televoters. And in the third column, we're just assuming that each jury, each country voted only for 1 song, namely the song that received 12 points in the actress scheme, right? And that would produce that ranking with a lot of ties, as expected. In the next column, you do the same, but assuming that now each of them is voting for 2 instead of 1. right? And so on and so forth. So you produce here a lot of results, and you can actually, getting into the details, see that this would produce some meaningful differences with respect to the system that was actually in practice. Okay. Now, to conclude, because I don't want to be talking more than necessary, to encourage discussion afterwards, let me say that in the paper, we also move ahead from these voting schemes, and rather than just exploring how these work, we also concentrated on some other aspects of the current system in the Eurovision Song Contest, focusing on what we call framing effects. Framing effects, broadly speaking, encompassing a lot of effects such as opening or contrast effects. So Dean was in his talk was mentioning this is voting in blocks, what we call here collusive or reciprocal voting behavior that we document in some of the groups that he was mentioning. But at the same time, we also explore this idea of ordering effects that he also mentioned in passing. And more than that, for instance, in the past, there was this issue of the so-called opening advantage that we wanted to explore here in our data. And at the same time, this so-called peer effect. So how does it work for you to be surrounded by poor performers, so to speak? So if the nation performing before you did, and the one performing afterwards were of a low quality, that somehow enhances the perspective with respect to this performance. So these kind of effects were also explored in our paper. And finally, to conclude, there was this long-standing debate of this dichotomy between the public versus the general experts as to judge quality. Rather than concentrating on this specific issue itself of judging quality, we wanted to concentrate on a proxy, which is the predictive power, so to speak. And we wanted to see whether televoters or experts were better predictors of the final outcome. And we found that in general, televoters get closer to this and are better forecasters, so to speak. Anyhow, as I said, I just wanted to give this quick presentation to encourage discussion afterwards. And let me insist that many of the things that are sitting here are with diffidence because I don't have that much expertise with cultural economics, but I'll be happy to listen to your comments afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan. Very interesting presentations introduced by the historical context of the contest and the very issue of the voting mechanism. I was intrigued in particular by these framing effects of collusive, reciprocal behavior of voting clusters. And I was thinking about possible parallel platforms to the voting platform, namely social media, and how this can affect the voting process and therefore the voting results. Do current tools allow to control for these possible effects?
I don't know. Maybe Dean knows better than me, but my experience is that there's not that kind of control in the current scheme.
Control in the research, in the analysis.
Sorry. Yes. No. In the analysis, that was essentially, in our case, that was essentially exploring this voting in blocks and reciprocity. For instance, there was this obvious case of Turkey and Cyprus that were consistently given the highest possible score among each other.
Cyprus.
Right. And also there's this case of the Balkans, as Dean mentioned before. Some countries in the Balkans usually gave larger than average scoring among themselves, the Nordic too, and also the French-speaking countries. But we didn't move ahead to control this analysis with respect to this social media effects that you were considering. So maybe, I don't know, maybe Dean knows a bit more about this specific issue.
I can just say that in the actual way that the contest is organized now, when the semifinals distribution are decided, the countries are divided between the semifinals. So there's a split, let's say, between countries of the former Yugoslavia, 3 in one pool, 3 in the other, so that this impact of voting bloc, collusion, whatever you want to call it, can somehow be mitigated. And the same goes, for other countries as well. To not have so many countries of the same blocks or clusters in the same semi-final. So this is one tool that the European Broadcasting uses in order to control this.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, let me insist. Probably I didn't mention this in passing, but I did write this in my slides. We concentrated on the final of the Rotterdam edition. So we didn't look at the semifinals, where indeed this sort of control might be implemented. When you have the final, it's just one group, and in principle, you can now prevent some countries from voting others.
And everyone gets to vote in the final.
Exactly, so, yes.
But we can safely say that the block voting really only influences the positioning of an entry around the middle of the scoreboard. It's not
right
for determining the winner. Otherwise, we would, of course, have the same countries being repeated as winners over the years.
Right.
I think there is a question or comment from Carol.
Yes, thank you. And thanks so much for these two thought-provoking and very interesting presentations. We are working on a paper, or actually on like a series of projects using 100 years of data on classical music competitions. And there we look, among others, as a gender kind of biases and equality issues. And with this in mind, I really, I'm curious to hear what is the state of knowledge when it comes to gender discrimination in the Eurovision competitions. Discrimination by maybe juries and or audiences. Is there something known? And second, also a follow-up question, I guess, like taking a step back here, all these studies of music competitions, I guess they are motivated because supposedly these competitions matter for the career success of a musician or of a band. What is the evidence on this? So do we know something that indeed, winning the first prize or being among the finalists causally improves the career prospects of a musician? Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. So who would like to respond?
Maybe I can start because I have very little to say. And my honest response is that we didn't explore neither gender issues nor career effects, so to speak. Those are very natural and interesting aspects, but at least in my case, I'm unable to provide any information whatsoever. But very interesting topics, yeah, definitely.
I can say something because this is something I did look at in my research. So when it comes to the gender question, women have won Eurovision more than men have. So this has generally been an event dominated slightly more by female artists. The second thing is when it comes to discrimination by the juries, I can't say that this is something I noted when it comes, to male-female issues, but this is something that I noted when it came to sexual minorities. So what happened 10 years ago was that the European Broadcasting Union decided to make the identities of the jury members public, so with their full name. The impact that this had was that jury members would not vote for entries which were somehow politically inappropriate for their countries. So, for example, they wouldn't vote for another country which might have been in conflict with their own country. Here I'm thinking especially of Azerbaijan and Armenia. Or they wouldn't vote if they came from a country in which gay rights were low, in which there was a low social tolerance of sexual minorities, then they wouldn't vote for a queer act, let's say. And this we especially saw with regards to the win of Conchita Wurst in 2014. So this is something that I think was very noticeable in the voting.
It's very interesting. Can I jump in with a follow-up question, Elisabetta?
Yes, sure, please go ahead. And then we hear from Andrei.
Yes, sorry, Andrei. I hear that more women won the competition, but is this conditional on the number of participants? Have you looked, whether I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise that more women win if only women were participating, or if female were the dominant participant.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't that dominant, I would say, when it comes to the figures from what I recall now, because this is research I did quite a time ago. But in my book, I do note that, female contestants have won Eurovision more than male ones have. So I can look to see if I have the exact figures on the gender distribution, if you like, of the actual artists, because I did go through all of the songs. And this was something that I noted in all of the entries, how many men and women there were, even in group acts. So if you like, I could take a look at that and we can be in touch.
And I would also consider gender neutral participants, because
of
this
course,
is an important aspect.
Yeah, this is definitely something we also have to think about. I mean, self-definition is something also that needs to be taken into consideration in this regard, but which in my research I could not do, because I could not ask every single entrant how they would define themselves in these terms. So I went for more, traditional identifiers of this. But of course, yes, gender neutral, and especially in recent years when this has become more of a visible category. Can I just also add a quick answer to, does winning the first prize affect the career possibilities? No. I think this is one of the big paradoxes of Eurovision, that it's, the world's biggest pop music competition, but victory in it does not ensure success. Global success for the winner. National success, definitely. Regional success, likely, but not global success. We've only had a few acts that have won Eurovision that have become global stars. ABBA, Domenico Modugno, well, he didn't even win, he came third. Celine Dion, Maneskin. I think Domenico Modugno is a great example because he came third, but he had the most successful non-English language entry from Eurovision ever. So maybe it's better to not come first in Eurovision.
Okay, thank you. Andrei, yes, please.
Thank you. Do we hear each other?
Yes.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for the presentations. My question relates to the second one, to the proposal on the Shapley voting. The systems, this has been studied also earlier, of Eurovision voting are usually quite complex already now. How would this be feasible? I mean, is this implementable, the proposal that you mentioned? And also, I would assume that the votes were usually ranked. I mean, some people, some countries prefer some participants over other. Is this taken into account? And how to account this if the votes are distributed equally? Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, in terms of implementing the method, it's feasible as soon as you just ask at the end that each jury reports this sort of ballot, so to speak, with the approved songs for each of the countries. It's just a matter of an easy software to just aggregate this, and this will be immediate. So as for implementing, this is certainly feasible. Now, the other issue you were saying is that it's true that as I presented the method, it's only allowing each voter to select two groups, the approved songs and the non-approved songs. And you might want to fine-tune this by discriminating among those you select. And you can certainly do that with what we call weighted Shapley voting. Meaning what? Meaning that you will be providing different scoring for each of these songs, and it doesn't need to be homogeneous for all of them. It could get closer to the actual scheme, but at the same time, it could be allowing for more flexibility. So put it differently, it could be a step closer towards what we believe a more interesting method in the sense of simplifying the process, but at the same time allowing for some flexibility to discriminate among those songs that are considered good, but not equally good. I don't know if you were asking for, yeah, I think those are the. Yeah.
Thanks for now. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think that from the floor, there are people disagreeing about the effect of winning the Eurovision for prospect careers. So Luis Cesar is disagreeing, and he's bringing an example. So he points to Mocedades in Spain, who actually, according to Luis Cesar, benefited of the Eurovision contest. So Luis Cesar, is that an anecdotal observation, or you have figures supporting your statement? Would you like to intervene, Luis Cesar?
Yes. Thank you, Elisabetta. No, I don't have specific figures, only my experience, my long experience, because I am a fanatic of this festival, of this European Song Contest. I must say that I always thought that this event, it's the purest example of merging cultural things, leisure, technology, foreign affairs, and even public policy. In my classes of public policy, I usually put some even exam questions to my students as regards the kind of voting, the kind of selecting, and so on. This is always a scandal in my department when I put this kind of question. But one thing that I would like just to reflect, to put in the table, is that finally I think that this experience gives rise to a special thought, which is how relative is the democracy, I think. Because I think that we agree, all of us, that the initial democracy is from the Greeks. Then we need to have elections, one person, one vote, in order to secure the best. But finally, with the European Song Contest, we demonstrate that voting is so complicated that we never reach the best, because we have to merge or to change the number of votes, the scale of the votes, merging experts and televoters. Now globalizing the scope of the votes and the offer, and even the cultural supply. And may I, thanks to my long experience on that, because my age, to tell us an anecdote, but because maybe Dean didn't know. I don't know if Juan, because he is Spanish, no. I remember that the first time that Spain won the festival, and then we organized the second time the festival, was in the full dictatorship. We lived in the dictatorship. And then it was the first time, I don't know if you remember, Juan, the first was Maciel, the second was, I don't remember the name.
Salome.
Salome, yes. And then in that case, the voting was between 1 and 6. Each country votes 6 songs with this rank. And in that time, there was an odd between, I don't remember, 4 countries. 4 countries won at that time the festival. Spain, and others. And then it is curious that in our full dictatorship, it was demonstrated because there was at the beginning some political conflicts around the festival because the people supporting democracy in Spain would like to demonstrate that one vote, one country, the benefits of a democracy. And finally, it was demonstrated that voting was finally, they don't agree to a winner. Then since that time, Eurovision changed the rank of voting between 1 and 12, then weighting the votes. And at the end, very recent, we are merging, in our case, experts, televoters. The expert, really, they are not expert because I don't know what you remember here in Spain. The expert is the maybe nice girl, nice handsome man, celebrities and so on. But really, they are not expert on songs or music. And finally, I would like just to put this subject. What's your opinion? Do you think that Eurovision Song Contest relativiza the democracy voting? Thank you.
Thank you, Luis Cesar. By the way, the ancient Greeks warned that democracy was not a perfect system.
And also arrow.
So,
remove arrow.
Yeah, I was. Sorry, go ahead, Isabel.
No, please go ahead. We're very interested.
I mean, there were many things in this comment. Well, first of all, I'd like to start with the end, with Kenneth Arrow's work in the 50s. So he was a Nobel Prize winner, and he sort of invented this field of social choice. And some people claim that he even killed the field himself right after inventing it, because his famous impossibility theorem is essentially saying that there's no way in which we can aggregate individual opinions into a consistent, quote unquote, and well-behaved social ranking. We know that. But that simply reflects that this is a very complex problem. If you think about it, we have a group of individuals, and it doesn't need to be huge. You have a bunch of individuals with different views, and aggregating those views into a social ranking is extremely complicated. And history is full of examples of that, right? Sadly enough. I don't think Eurovision is shaping this at all. This is a well-known debate that economists have, as I said, have been treating for longer than Eurovision has been around, actually. It's true that in some cases, there were problems with the outcome of the contest, and that might have prompted new revisions. And as I said at the beginning of my presentation, there's been 18 changes in the system during all this period. And they will continue, I believe. Why? Because it will never be feasible to find a universal and perfect, quote unquote, system. Having said this, and I believe there's still room for improvement, and that's why we wanted to make this suggestion with this specific case of Eurovision. Now, regarding the cases of Spain you were mentioning, I wasn't around, but I've, of course, heard a lot of it. You're right. There was a time in which this country, Spain, was living in the darkest moments of its recent history, right? In the middle of a brutal dictatorship. Well, all dictatorships are brutal, right? But that was one of them. And something that you didn't mention is that our first winner, Maciel, actually won because a singer, a Catalan singer, Joan Manuel Serrat, wasn't allowed to sing in Catalan this song. Franco didn't allow to do so in Catalan. Then Maciel came in and did it in Spanish, and we ended up winning.
I don't agree, Juan. I don't agree with it. If you know the really history, is that the singer was Juan Manuel Serrat.
Yes.
He decided not to participate in the festival, but the song belongs primarily to the authors, which was this couple. I don't remember the.
No, right. But what I was trying to say is that he was.
It is said that when Maciel won, it is really another mention to the public choice, because there was maybe a Higgsian exchange because it is said that the Ministry of Culture at that time in Spain bought the votes in order to Maciel won the festival.
Can I intervene here? Because this is actually one of the myths I addressed in my book, and it's not true. This is not true. We have no archival evidence of this. And it's not the case that the Spanish TV went around Europe bribing television organizations across Western Europe. The names that are mentioned are Bulgaria and Czechoslovakia, what I found in my research. They weren't participating in Eurovision, of course, but they were participating in an Eastern European equivalent called the Eurovision Song Contest, in which Spain also participated in 1968 as a way of its attempts to develop diplomatic relations with Eastern Europe, which were, of course, non-existent for a long time because of the Franco government's anti-communist stance. So this bribing to win Eurovision is simply not true.
But there is maybe a black legend.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's open our frontiers from Spain. By the way, today is the anniversary of the Constitution. So
yes, today is.
In Spain. Andrei, do you have another question or comment, please? And if you speak, please, can you switch your camera on?
Yes, thank you. I'm through mobile, so yeah, thanks. So I think that the biases that you mentioned, actually these neighbor biases, were documented in earlier literature, Clarides, Stengos, and others. I mean, to which extent is it sensible to control at all? Is this Shapley voting system able to prevent this? And to which extent actually this happens throughout Greece and Cyprus are probably the most exposed examples of this, how to control for it, and is it sensible to control for it at all, because it happened throughout the probably full history of Eurovision. This is well documented also in the literature, in culture economics and other. Thanks. The question is probably for both speakers.
Thank you, Andrei.
So Dean, you might want to go first this time, and then
I think I'll leave this one to you.
Okay. No, I mean, in the case, yes, in the case of the Shapley method, I mean, it's also prone to this kind of manipulation, so to speak. So it's not immune to it, because as soon as you allow each voter to select a number of songs, there's this option that they select these neighboring countries. Why not? So there's no way that the method in itself can prevent this manipulation from happening. Another thing is to set up some rules in the design, such as what Dean was mentioning before in the semifinals, right? So you have two groups, and then you try to avoid these neighboring countries being in the same group. But as soon as you have the final and you allow everyone to vote for everyone, then there's no way you can avoid this. That's probably deeper than. But again, let me take you back to the discussion I was having before with Luis Cesar. So this goes back to Arrow's theorem. That was in the 50s, but in the 70s, there's an equally famous theorem in the field of social choice known as the Gibbard-Satterwhite theorem, which is essentially saying that all voting methods that we can think of are subject to manipulation. There's no, and the theorem, mathematically speaking, the theorems are almost equivalent. So it is the same kind of fundamental issue that happens in both Arrow's theorem and Gibbard-Satterwhite theorem. Essentially, the idea here is that you have too much freedom to design your voting schemes, and that opens the floor for possible manipulations. So there's no way we can get rid of fully of manipulations. You can just make it more difficult in the design of the scheme.
And we have not spoken about algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
Yes.
I just shortly add that to which extent is these combinations between experts and voters able to control for this at all? Clarides and Stengos claimed this would happen some 10 years back, but does this help?
My view here is that if you're going to use these two bodies of voters, namely televoters and expert, you should try to put them on an equal footing. And as it is nowadays, that's far from being the case, right? Because you have these televoters voting with SMS as much as they want, essentially. Whereas you have the juries setting these rankings, so that in my view, they should be on a more equal footing, precisely because the rules are indicating that they will be equally counted 50% each as of now, right? But of course, they're completely different bodies. And you can think of a more emotional on the one side, more, reflecting on the votes on the other side. But again, this touches something that I mentioned in passing, this long-standing debate as to whether the general public or the experts are better judges of quality. And it's not a clear debate at all. And actually, my dear friend Victor Ginsburgh has worked deeply on this issue, and it's a fascinating issue to me. I mean, for instance, Victor and I are now working on the case of movies, and then we wanted to compare what happens with the Oscars and with the big three festivals in Europe. Conventional wisdom says that the big three festivals normally reward better, quote unquote, movies. But it turns out that in retrospect, when you go to these services, websites, gathering critiques, it turns out that as time passes, the Oscar winners receive better ratings on average than the others, which again takes us back to who are indeed better predictors of quality, and it's not a clear debate whatsoever. But I find interesting that the Eurovision is trying to mix both bodies.
Time means history. So, Dean, what is your say about that?
I would ask, why does it matter? André, you've mentioned the voting blocks. I would say that they've never really determined the winner in Eurovision. So does it matter that they exist? I think not. I think even though it's obvious that voting blocks do exist, even though it's obvious that there has been collusive voting between delegations, especially, when there was only jury voting before 1999, perhaps it's, part of the attraction of the contest. Europeans love this contest because they love to analyze the voting. They love to see this collusion. They love to see, the block voting. They love to see it confirmed that Greece and Cyprus will give each other 12 points. This is part of the folklore of the contest, and perhaps it's for this reason been retained in the DNA of the contest. I also think that when it comes to voting, we don't have enough study on why people vote the way they do, especially with public voting. And this is something I really would like to see. We've spoken a lot about democracy, but I think actually the issue is one of meritocracy. Are people really voting for the best acts, and do they know how to vote in that way? Do they know how to spot what they think is the best and to vote this way? One of the problems with Eurovision in recent years is that it has become perhaps more of a platform for the making of political statements. I won't say this is a problem. I would say it's an issue that we've seen increasingly in Eurovision since Conchita Wurst won in 2014, where people want to vote because they want to support a certain social or political cause. We saw that with Conchita, even though her performance was also fantastic. We also saw it with Ukraine this year, most of all. Even though the Ukrainian performance was also excellent. These are two excellent acts, but with them they carried a story. And this is what the viewer also wants to see these days in Eurovision. They want the songs to be meaningful, to be significant, to engage with the world. This is Eurovision. It's a stage for socio and political issues. It's a stage for international relations. And this is what people want to see in Eurovision. They don't just want to see any other song contest.
So thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of the hour, and we needed to wrap up. We had very interesting insights from both speakers, Dean Vuletic and Juan Moreno-Ternero, and we touch upon social choice issues, framing effects, collusion, the gender issue about participants and winners of the contest. We also more or less indirectly ask the question, who are better judges, the televoters or the so-called experts, and also that the finding that Eurovision as such does not guarantee the success of singers. So perhaps singers could strategically position themselves in other contests. So once again, competition in competition. And we also touch upon manipulation and the issue of democracy versus meritocracy. So this could be could inspire very much voting in other situations, starting from politics, but many other fields. So I would like to thank the two speakers again, Dean and Juan, and also the co-writers and co-editors. This is our last Cultural Economics online seminar of the year. And we will meet again, so please mark your calendars, on the 17th of January 2023. Please stay tuned in order to know if it will be in the morning or in the afternoon, depending on the speakers' time zones and corresponding availabilities. So thank you so much, and you have always the opportunity to watch the past seminars online. And I know that Luis Cesar, our Cultural Economics Association president, wants to announce that there is out the call for papers of the next biannual conference of cultural economics next June, that will be held in Indiana, at Indiana University. So please visit the website of our association in order to propose an abstract, and we really look forward to see each other, many in Indiana, in the United States in June. Luis Cesar, would you like to add something else?
No, this is just for saying what you have said. I invite Dean and Juan to come to Indiana to present works on this exciting subject in our main forum, scientific forum, which be held in Indiana. Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this seminar, which is fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your contributions. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and see you next year, next January. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.